Hello and welcome. It's been almost a year since I created this podcast. And to be honest, it was around this time last year that I created this. It was right at Easter, around Easter week or something. I was actually going through a very difficult year of my life. And I decided to talk about certain things. And to be honest, I wasn't strong or I wasn't able to comprehend what I was going through. I wasn't able to convey with words the emotional, the roller coaster, the backwards, because that's what I call it, the backwards growing in my life. And I decided I need to just start talking about this. It's not easy. My name is Marisely. I started a process back in 2020 that I opened a business, the Life Anchor Center. And at the time, I was just a life coach. And through the last few years, God has taken us through a process of more of a biblical center. I am taking the second stage of a biblical counselor. So I'm actually right now taking the test. It's 40 questions. And within those 40 questions, 20 questions has to do with theological questions, and the other 20 has to do with um, Christian and mental health. And most of these questions are not easy questions. They require about a page and a half of an answer. So by the end of it, you almost have a thesis, I want to say. So the backwards growth for me. And the other one is that I've come from a place where the criticism or people say that I don't know how to express myself or that I don't know how to speak. And that's always in my mind, or that I'm hostile. And that is something that it has stopped me from doing anything, to be honest. It has stopped me from developing anything, from coming on live, from doing a podcast, from speaking at all, anywhere, or doing anything. And that has me just stuck. And I don't want to stay there. I want to say that in the last 3.5 years, I can say that I have been in a reconstruction life. That's what they call it. And I'll keep talking about a little bit about what's happening, where I'm coming from, why I say my growth has been backwards. Um, and I just don't want to say things just to say, but I want to talk about something that doesn't get honest conversation in the Christian space. And that's what happens to your mind, to your emotions, to your nerve system, where your entire spiritual foundation has been built on something unstable. And what do I mean unstable? Well, let me continue talking about the the spiritual foundation that was unstable in my life, because my growth didn't look like um what anybody would see or think, or what you will see in a church. I didn't go from lost to found in one clean moment. Mine's went backwards first. And if yours did too, well, welcome. Come on in and stay here. I want to say that I was there as well. I want to say that I'm with you and that you're here with me. I grew up in an environment that were loud and emotional and full of promises. Pentecostal, charismatic, prosperity gospel, prophecy gospel, law of attraction gospel. I want to say I can continue naming it all. And if you have been in those spaces, you know what I mean when I say it is It's kind of a like an electric feeling. It feels like God is everywhere all the time, every feeling, every breakthrough, and every financial miracle that's on its way. That's how I lived most of my life. And when you are in that environment, your emotions are your theology. Listen to me. Your emotions are your theology. If you feel it, it must be God. If you're crying, the Holy Spirit is moving. If something feels powerful, it must be true. Nobody teaches you to slow down and test what you're receiving, right? Nothing. They don't teach you that what you're receiving, you have to test that against the scriptures. You just feel it and believe in it, and you move through it, and you make choices through it. So, what happens to a person like me when the feeling stops matching that promise? I never really had anything for me to compare my life with, meaning outside of being Pentecostal, there was nothing that I could compare it to because I grew up in it. It wasn't like I could just say, oh, let me walk away from Pentecostal and let me see what Reformed theology is, or let me see what Armenian are, let me see what the Calvinists are doing, let me see what anything else was doing, because from it in my life, that was demonic. Anything outside of Pentecostal, you didn't want to learn, you could not learn. Oh my gosh, don't go over there because that's the wrong teaching. So what happens you when you are raised this way? What happens when you spoke it in faith and it didn't come through? And most of my life was about this is the way it is. And if it doesn't come true or if it doesn't happen, it's because you lack faith. So what happens when the pastor you trusted uh, turned out to be more interested in your money than actually your soul? What happens to the version of you that built her entire relationship with God on emotions and experience? Yeah, it's hard. In the end, you're going to crash. I mean, we are all going to crash in the end. And then we go back into the same pattern because we crash from that. So that means, oh my gosh, I crashed. So that means I have to restart again with the same process and doing the same thing over and thinking you're going to get a different result. That doesn't work that way. And again, another part why I don't sometimes talk is because of my accents. I might say the wrong spelling of the word, or I might announce it or say it the wrong way. It's a whole thing, guys. But you know what? I'm coming here. I'm going to do this. So what happens to that person that they built their entire relationship with God on emotions and experience? Well, you're going to crash hard. And that's what happened. I crashed hard. And I'm talking about, I just turned 50 last year, guys. And I am talking about an entire lifespan. I Last year was hard because I had to grieve 40 years of my life. I want to say that maybe 40 years, right? So three and a half of being 50, being alive at 50 years, right? So 40 of wasted years. Three and a half maybe when I started to really understand scripture. And so that's within the 10 years that I want to say that, because I say 40 years that I got to grieve, and 10 years of those, 3 almost 4 years have been where I have grown in scriptures. And then the other 6, maybe when I was 6 years old and I didn't know any better, and that was my life. That was it. And then you hit 10 years old and somehow you're in a charismatic Pentecostal church, and somehow They say, well, I spoke in tongues and when I was 10, and then you convey this to your mom, and then your mom says, oh my gosh, now you can't do this and you can't do that, and you got to be careful now, because you got to be careful with the Holy Spirit, that he doesn't leave you. And that was a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother different thing growing up as a kid who doesn't know what are you talking about. So if I make a mistake, the Holy Spirit's going to leave me and never come back. Is that what you're saying? So my salvation goes with it too. These are the hard things that people don't understand. As a person that I am, where I come from, there's going to be a lot of things that I will go back and forth, because it's a lot. It's 40 years, guys. And where do I do with all this stuff? Where do you go? Who do you talk to about this? Who can understand what you actually gone through? So then there's the part of growing up in a bad environment, and you move to, I forward that to when the addiction came into my life. For me, some of that crash looked like alcohol. I'm not going to dress that. I'm not going to dress that up or skip over it. I can't. It was most of my life, because somebody's listening needs to hear and name it out loud. I had to understand that I was an alcoholic because I enjoyed drinking, not because I had a spirit, not because I had a demon, not because of anything else that people will always tell me. When your spirit or when your spiritual foundation collapse and your emotions have been guided, and suddenly you don't know what is God and what is his plan over your life. And is this just noise? Who is God at that moment? You don't know what God is. And if this is just a noise that you're going through, you don't know anything. You find something else to regulate how you feel. And that's when the addiction is. And it's the core of my addiction. It is the coping mechanism for pain that you don't have a language for. Because I didn't know, I felt like I was a lost puppy. Pentecostal, then from Pentecostal, I went to what they call it, the liberal church, that you could actually start wearing pants, earrings, you could cut your hair, and you could do all this other stuff that doesn't make you lose your salvation, but you still don't know if you are saved anyways, because you never had a relationship with Christ. So you are really not saved. You are just doing, and you're just in church, walking in church, doing. You're just doing. That's what my life was about. And I had a lot of pain. I didn't have the language for it. I grew up here in the USA. I came from Puerto Rico when I was maybe 9 years old, and my parents really didn't speak the language. And that was another barrier in my life. That was another dramatic part of my growth. And it's a lot of things that if I continue talking about it, it's just a long story. But yes, there was a lot of pain that I didn't have a language for. I have been in toxic environments most of my life. I had been told versions of a gospel that centered my comfort and my outcomes instead of Christ's sufficiency. And when that didn't work, I didn't leave quietly. I unraveled into this person. I was angry, didn't know any better, didn't know the gospel, never really read the gospel with the way it was written. I I had a broken vision of it. I had a blurred vision of this gospel. I didn't know the gospel. So how was I going to read the gospel when it was taught to me a certain way? So I'm telling you this not because I'm still there, but because I know that some of you are. And I know that you have been told in church that struggle means weak faith. That if you were really trusting in God, you wouldn't be fighting these things. I'm here to tell you that is a lie. And it was taught to you by people who were also afraid of their own weaknesses. And it's hard to actually articulate or even express this on a podcast. How do you come back from an entire year being away and start talking about what? So this is where my transition is at. This is where I'm at today, 2026, after leaving charismatic, Pentecostal, and everything else that didn't involve scriptures. It's been about it's going to be almost 4 years this year. It's been the hardest 4 year of my life. Understanding the scriptures, understanding theology, and leaving charismatic. And now I want to say that I don't want to say that I'm in reform or yes, I am reform faith, but I just don't want to box that in. It's just that's where I attend is kind of like a reform church. But I want to say that the scriptures is not about reform. It's not about putting names into it. It's not about labels. That's not what the scriptures is. But it is the one of the liberating thing that I have actually learned from where I come from. And one of the things I still navigate is my mood swings. Not the depression exactly, though that has been part of it too, but it's the cycles. There are cycles, right? The highs and the lows. And that's where I struggle with. That is part of my background. That is part of the world that I was in for so long and the addiction that kept me bound because of I didn't know what this ups and down was and I had a battle with that and I had to understand it, but at the time it was a demon or a spirit, right? So these cycling ups and down, the highs and the lows that don't always have an obvious trigger. And for a long time, I spiritualized it because that was the way it was taught to me. I taught, I thought something was wrong with me or my faith. I thought if I prayed more, I studied more, I surrendered more, the swings that I had, my mood swings, will level out. What I have come to understand and what I want you to hear is that when you have spent years in a emotional driven, high stimulation, spiritually chaotic environment, your nerve system learns to live in extremes. It doesn't know how to rest and study. Calm actually feels wrong because you were trained to equate intensity with God's presence. So I have issues in my life today. I have chronic insomnia. I have what they're called tinnitus. I have a ringing that we think it comes from the ears, but it's actually a neurological issue with the brain. And I'll have to explain that later on. Maybe I didn't say it correctly, but it has to do with the brain. Okay, guys. And that is one of the things that I have had to live with in my life. And what I have come to understand and what I want you to hear is that all those years that you spent in that emotional, driven, high stimulating, spiritual, chaotic environment and the chaos that comes with it, you don't understand and you cannot understand what it is to be in a calm, quiet place. So the mood swings weren't just hormonal. They weren't just spiritual. There were the evidence of a woman. whose whole emotional system had been shaped, but by an unstable ground. And healing from that, guys, really healing, takes longer than a prayer and a worship set. Because again, this is what they teach you, that if you pray for so long, you fast for so long, you pray for so long, you should overcome these things and you should be healed by now, right? And this is why biblical counseling matters in my life. Not because the Bible ignores what's happening in your body and in your mind, but because it is the only place where your whole person, your whole your whole history, your neurology, your sin, your suffering, and your sanctification are taken seriously at the same time. And then someone in a toxic environment like myself, meant to harm, not to help, right? um, Actually pushed me towards that one thing that will become my purpose. Life Anchor Center didn't come from a vision board, or maybe it did, or a business plan, because I didn't have that. I mean, I had this thing inside of me that I wanted to help women, and where my background is alcoholic, mental health, ending up in a mental institution, not being there for my kids, having a chaotic lifestyle. And I was like, well, this is my purpose. And this is what they're telling me that I need to do. And I need to open a business. And because I have a strong testimony, that means that I could go and my testimony will become a business. And Life Anchor Center came. It came from pain. It came from realizing that I have lived through enough to sit with someone else in theirs. That is not a clean um origin story. It's not an original story that I could just sit here and make up, but it is a true one. It's my story. And I think that the truest thing are almost never clean. So that's who I am. That's where I'm at today. And that's why this podcast exists in the beginning, because the women who need real help are not going to find it in places that pretends the hard stuff doesn't happen, because hard stuff does happen. I've lived it, I've seen it. And this is where I wanted to just come in and share this first episode where it is hard. And that's where I'm at. It is a hard place to process. It's a hard place to be at. And it's hard to find people in my community here. And where I live, it is so hard to find actual women that want to grow, that want to know God, that want to grow in the scriptures, but not follow a trend or not follow what that sister is doing, what that church is doing. What I find is more women to be loyal to their pastors than actually being loyal to God. It's more of a people pleasing environment than actually God pleasing. And that's what is hard. It's hard to find a community of women that are that could say, I've had enough. I don't want this anymore. How can I come out of this? How can I grow? How can I leave that environment? How can I leave that toxic environment and go into something where I'm going to grow, where I'm going to be nurtured, where I'm going to be disciple, where I'm going to know who Christ is? I've met a few, not a lot. And I ask myself, where are those women like myself that are in that between season? Where are they? Because I could say, women in my church are fine and dandy, but they can't and they don't understand where I'm at because they've never gone through most of my pain. They haven't gone through most of my life. And so it's hard because I was never that person that wanted to be a stay-home mom. That's not me. I was never that person either. So it's the between stages is where are those women? I'm in a season where in my own business I'm struggling. How do I move forward? I stopped everything in the last 3.5 years. I stopped the gatherings, I stopped my retreats, I stopped so many things. And where I'm at this year is that I'm building and I'm learning to establish this healthy God in my life now where I didn't have before, and I'm trusting in who he is, but I'm having a hard time trusting any type of decisions because I made so many wrong decisions in my past that moving forward looks scary. So that's where I'm at this season. Where are those women? I want to get to know those women. I want to have a conversation with those women. And that's where I'm at. This is where I bring this. This is where Life Anchor Center is, where people think that biblical counselors have it all together. And I see biblical counselors that write books and they have it all together. And man, I wish I was there, but I'm not. But I still help women in their pain and their suffering and knowing who Christ is and knowing what he did for me and learning about grace. That's changed everything in my life. Knowing about grace, knowing what grace is in my life, that's been one of the most important lessons in my life. So I do hope that I continue doing this. Again, I do have certain times that I don't feel like being around people. I'm battling with that. I'm learning about that more and more. I'm learning about everything that I go through and my where I come from, my nerve system that was shot, the questions and questioning myself and questioning, is that God? Is that my emotions? So that's where I'm at. And that's why this podcast came from. And I couldn't talk about that last year. I was in a stage of anger. I was so angry. And now it's different. I'm still in a place of, oh my gosh, what was I doing? How did I never see that? How was I so blind? But grace. So thank you for being here. I hope this speaks to anyone. I hope you could share this. I hope you can invite other sisters to listen to this. I keep it real. I don't have an agenda. I really don't. I'm going to see how this is going to work out. I hope this was encouraging. God bless. And I hope to come back again. Bye.